What is your oh, wait, you're serious moment? Some guys where I worked were planning to gang essay a girl in the parking lot when the shift ended. It wasn't a hilarious haha story, even at first, but it really seemed like just really horribly inappropriate joking. It was a lunch table I sat down at during my break with guys around my age. At first, I was just really uncomfortable and just tried to shut up and tune it out. But then they tried to include me, and it escalated to them full out planning details, and I was just about sick at the table. I was absolutely sure they were going to do it. So, as soon as they were gone, I went and told my dad, who was the safety guy at the plant, and he made sure cops were waiting for them in the parking lot, and that girl had someone walking her car to car from then on. Whole thing was so effed. Story 2. When I was in high school, I received a message over MSN from a buddy saying, Mitch is dead. Thinking he got into trouble, I responded with, aha, what'd he do? It turns out he had a brain aneurysm while driving home from school. Story 3. I came into my job and my boss was running a bit late for an unknown reason. Now, my boss is the type of person to joke about anything, no matter how serious it is, and will pull it off with a straight face. We never really take him seriously unless it's directly related to work. He comes in after being late and after a bit just casually says our close coworker had passed the previous night. I literally chuckled and said, yeah, sure, and blew it off. He then said that he died from a heart attack before he was set to go out with his buddies during the evening. I then said, oh wait, you're actually serious? And he almost started crying right there and said yes. I miss that man to this day. Really chill guy with some cool hobbies and volunteer work. I also feel so bad for my boss because they'd known each other for years. Story 4. Friend 1. Hey man, how come you decided to shave all your hair off? Friend 2. The chemo kind of decided for him. Friend 1. F off, Joe. No, seriously though, how come? Me. He's actually not joking. Funniest crap that ever happened to me. Edit. I'm basically fine now, on close monitoring for the next few years, but no further treatment. Thanks for asking. Story 5. I once worked with a 50-some-year-old guy at my first job, who also happened to be a former crackhead. I added in that detail because his mannerisms and communication were clearly affected by his prior drug use, and he would sometimes laugh when he was telling serious stories. One day, he was telling me a story about him accidentally setting fire to the woods when he was trying to cremate his dead pet frog when he was a little boy. I was laughing my ass off, and strangely, so was he, until he looked me dead in the eye with a face that's as serious as they get and says, quote, I'm still not over it. I knew that look and knew he was actually being serious, despite being in absolute hysterics with me while telling his story. I immediately felt like an a-hole. He was cool about it, though, thankfully, lol. So I know that there's definitely people out there that laugh when they're high-strung or anxious or scared, and I guess it's kind of like a coping mechanism in a way, so glad that he's okay. Glad that OP recognized that it was still a traumatic event and you guys were able to have an understanding there. Story 6. An intern at the vet I work at was a very, very sheltered Mormon. He came to work one day panicked. He had his first kiss the night before, asked the girl to marry him, and was concerned about his wedding date. He was obviously convinced that he got her pregnant by kissing her. Absolutely convinced. It took me a long time to register what he was panicked about because it sounded so absurd. He delivered hundreds of kittens and puppies by then. I just thought he had also learned about human reproductive anatomy as well as animals by then. Story 7. My friends and I grew up sheltered Christians. I was the least sheltered, as my parents still believed in science and dinosaurs, and my sex ed talk with them was informative and normal and featured all the scientifically appropriate names for genitals and whatnot. They didn't want me to have sex, but they did me the decency of explaining how it worked and that it wasn't bad. It was for people who had made a strong commitment to one another and was fun when you did it right and were being smart. I didn't realize how lucky I was till a friend of mine, panicked, asked me at lunch if it was true that a guy could get you pregnant through your genes. Insert my, wait, what? Moment. While she explains that she snuck out last night with a boy, and they had a heated makeout sesh which involved some heavy petting. Her mom had given her the talk and told her you could get pregnant even if both partners were wearing clothes. To this day, I don't know if her mom was that sheltered as well, or if this was a malicious way to keep her daughter from effing around, but I've never forgotten what seemed to my 14-year-old self as a great betrayal of trust between parent and child. And anyway, that'd be why she snuck out. If she had a normal mom, she could just introduce her to her boyfriend. Story 8. Someone wanted to euthanize their dog because when she was put outside alone in heat, she found a chihuahua and had ugly puppies that cost a breeding session. When we asked what that had to do with anything, he said the chihuahua's sperm is forever inside of her and can make those ugly puppies instead of the purebred. This dog was definitely not a purebred. When we said things don't work that way, he said, quote, "I know for a fact they do. That's why my daughter is half inward." Inward essayed my wife back when she was in her 20s, and his sperm stayed inside her until mine activated it. And we all know inward sperm is more violent, so it won. He was serious. If he was serious, he needs to be checked into a mental institution because that's insane and racist. Story 9. Waking up from general anesthesia. One of the nurses by my hospital bed gently informs me that my heart had stopped while I was under. I thought I was dreaming for a while and didn't take it seriously. Then my dad showed up and I saw the panic on his face. Then I phoned my mom, and she had obviously been crying her eyes out. Then I took it seriously. It was a tooth extraction, of all things, done under GA because I had a bad needle phobia and reacted poorly to the laughing gas they tried first. It really should have been an in and out sort of thing, but a few minutes in, my blood pressure tanked and my heart stopped. I was given medication and chest compressions, and my heart restarted quickly. They didn't even have to break my ribs for the compressions, though I did have some extremely painful bruising. I spent most of that day in the hospital. Initially, it seemed that it'd be an overnight stay, but the cardiologist assigned to me managed to figure out the cause of my heart stopping, and also that the odds of it happening again without further anesthesia were basically nil. So I got to go home that evening, under strict instructions to do nothing strenuous, to avoid alcohol and non-prescribed drugs, and to make sure someone could keep an eye on me. I live with my parents, so that wasn't hard. These days, it's mostly just an interesting note in my medical history. Whenever new doctors see my medical notes, they have a moment of, holy effing crap, what? When they get to the stopped heart. It's fun to watch. Edit. Whoops, forgot to say the cause. It was a really bad combo of biological factors. I have low natural blood pressure. Not dangerously so, but still low. I'm also on propranolol for migraine prevention, so my blood pressure is pretty low. This does not play well with anesthesia, of course. The way it was explained to me, the staff decided that the risk was still low enough that it would be safe, since it was a short procedure. Unfortunately, this procedure involved my mouth, which resulted in accidental vagus nerve stimulation. That, plus my crappy blood pressure and the anesthesia, made me go into bradycardia, and then my heart just noped the F out. Story 10. When I learned I had totally forgotten to attend almost every single class in one of my college courses, I forgot I had enrolled it. A classmate asked me, "Where have you been? You're never there when the teacher's taking attendance." And I was like, "Oh, that's funny." So anyway, F. Luckily, it was only about a month into the semester, and I managed to bring it back up to a low B. Well, props to you, OP, for sticking it out and bringing your grade up. If I had missed a month of class, I'd have just dropped it and tried again next semester. Unless you're getting ready to graduate, that's definitely the smarter course of action, I'd say. But you managed. Story 11. My estranged auntie sending me a message to disinvite me to my, sick but alive, father's funeral because, wait for it, I had lunch with my little half-brother and sister, and that's disrespectful to my father. My father let me and half-siblings meet before this lunch had occurred, and by meeting them, he disowned me. Literally, that's it. Just my effed up family. Story 12. I was on a Christian camping week here in the UK. There were some Americans with us. I found a stone on the beach with some great fossils in it and was showing it to some kids. One of the Americans started talking about how God had put fossils in the earth to mislead the vain who trusted their own observations rather than the Bible. I, naturally, thought he was joking and burst out laughing, and he was just so offended. He complained about me to the people running the camp, and they thought he was joking at first and laughed too. Story 13. Years back, I dated a girl who would lie compulsively about random things. The first big example, I went to her place. She just got Assassin's Creed for the first time and was really getting into the story. Like a week later, she was telling me how she just discovered her family were related to assassins from Florence. I thought it was a joke, but turns out she was serious, had changed her surname to something Italian on Facebook, and had already spread the lie about on social media. In my head, I was like, I literally watched you play Assassin's Creed last week. but she was gorgeous, way out of my league, so I put up with this and other crazy crap for another 6 months before I gave up. Yeah, never stick with a girl just because she's hot, and especially if she's a compulsive liar. Those are two ingredients in an absolute disaster recipe. That is cool, though, if she really was related to Ezio Auditore de Firenze from Assassin's Creed, but I doubt she is. Story 14. It's ridiculous that tampon ads aren't banned. The fact they're allowed in public just goes to show that women have too much power. This wasn't in response to a particularly graphic ad that pushed any boundaries, just a generic type about comfort and reliability. Took me a while to realize that he wasn't joking. Story 15. I was working at an Italian restaurant, and the owner was an uneducated but business-savvy old Italian guy who had a quite good-looking wife. Once after he noticed my girlfriend picking me up, he said to me, quote, "You know what the secret of a good marriage is? You have to keep them stupid." I laughed, thinking he was just joking, but he had a death-serious look on his face. Later, I learned that he had stopped his wife, they knew each other since childhood, from finishing school, and had forbidden her from doing anything other than taking care of the 4 children they had together. Story 16. I'm in Australia, and first heard of the news of 9/11 on my morning radio, USA Evening. I was stuck in traffic near the army base, and they announced it with sirens. To start it off, I thought it was a comedy sketch that I didn't think was particularly funny. I had a pretty dark sense of humor, too. Then I realized it was news. Holy crap. Story 17. When I was in college, 2 friends and I went out to a cheap Chinese buffet for a weekday lunch. We were probably not particularly well groomed or dressed at the time. So, at a nearby table, there's a woman and a man having lunch, both dressed in business attire. After they finish, the woman, probably in her 20s, comes over to our table out of nowhere and starts chatting with us, making normal chit-chat. Kind of odd, but maybe she's just friendly. All of a sudden she asks, "Do you guys like to F?" We just looked at each other and laughed nervously because how do you respond to that in this situation? She just stood there, completely serious. I don't even remember what we said to her after that, and this was 20 plus years ago, but despite sounding like the beginning of an adult content, it was only followed by another round at the buffet, not a gangbang. Story 18. Back in college, me and a few of my guys would get lunch every Tuesday. Me and 2 of the guys are there as normal and are waiting for our last guy, Todd. I start texting Todd and asking him about not being at lunch yet. The other guys start narrating what I should text, so I end up saying, "Matt says, get your roly-poly looking ass over here. Steve says that you're the personification of washing your hands and getting your sweater sleeves wet." It goes on like that for a bit. Then Todd calls me directly. He says he can't make it because his grandma died that morning and was headed home to see his family. The look on the other 2 guys' faces when I told them was priceless. Story 19. Was working on a job while in early days of college. It was in a popular American restaurant chain where I had been successful as a host, cashier, waiter, and member of their retail store for just about a year. I accidentally forgot that I had swapped shifts with someone and missed the shift entirely, but I came in a few hours after I had started to sincerely apologize and let them know I was going home to change and I'd be right back. They brought me to the back and told me I was fired. I laughed at first because the boss was occasionally a bit of a jokester. Then I realized he was serious. To this day, it gives me massive anxiety about underperforming in any job I have because I believe I'll just be fired for it and they'll move on regardless of my tenure or knowledge. Story 20. Colleague's wife confronting me on speakerphone. "Are you having an affair with my husband?" My exact response was to roar laughing, managing to offend them both simultaneously. Good job, geek peeps. Story 21. Oh, which to choose? In middle school, I had a habit of putting my foot in my mouth. Once I was in my English teacher's room finishing an assignment after school while she was talking to a parent. I finished and moved toward her desk, but stopped near her door so I wouldn't interrupt their conversation. As I was waiting, I could see directly to the girls' bathroom where I saw a boy my age, but not a student, small school, pacing in front of the girls' bathroom. I thought it odd and watched for a moment. Each time the door opened, he would peer as best he could into the bathroom, and I knew the JV cheerleaders were in there changing for practice. Alarmed, I said, quote, "Ew, there's a boy trying to look into the girls' bathroom." The teacher and parent stopped and quickly approached to watch the pacing boy. The parent then said, "That's my son." I started to laugh until I realized I was the only one. It was very awkward for a few moments till she excused herself, gathered her son, and left. The teacher still brings it up when I see her and laughs. For those of you curious of the outcome, he was on the spectrum and his sister, whom he idolized, was in there. He was waiting for her to come out. Story 22. I listed my Ford Explorer for sale. A guy emailed me to trade his 2018 Kia Forte or something. I didn't really need one since my fleet already had a 2013 Kia Forte, but he emailed me a few times saying he wants my Explorer but owes money on his Kia. I said, how much? And he said, it's an 8-year finance deal, so need to pay in total $45K. And he wanted my car. I could buy that car right now for $25 to $30K at the dealership brand new. He was dead serious. Story 23. Many years ago, I was having the "what are you into sexually" conversation with a girlfriend. We were at that point in the relationship. It starts vanilla enough and escalates to fetish and kink talk. At one point, the conversation went like this. Would you let me put spaghetti in your male private part hole? I chuckled. What? No. Thinking her next question would be about something else. What if it was cooked? How the hell would that help? What if it breaks? What if it was something more solid? You're not putting anything in my male private part hole. She got very upset and went off about how she needs to be with a sexually explorative, open person. She was legit mad at me because I told her I'm not into getting things stuffed into my male private part. Story 24. When Trump was running for president and then actually got elected, I'm not American and wasn't really paying attention to world politics, so I just thought it was a running meme that got out of hand, because obviously that wouldn't happen in real life. Wasn't until a friend brought it up in casual conversation that I realized it was real. I still don't think I fully processed it. Story 25. Not mine, but other half when I proposed to her. I asked, and she laughed, then said, "Are you serious?" Then when I showed her the ring, she realized. In her shock, she said yes, and has probably regretted it ever since. Story 26. A coworker was talking about a problem her daughter was having. Coworker was in her late 30s and daughter's about 13 to 14. Her daughter was conflicted because her best friend since birth, born same day, same hospital, literally since birth, became friends with a black boy and wants to date this black boy. But God said it's wrong to date outside your race. It isn't natural and it's against God. Black people are fine, but they can't date and procreate with white people. It's wrong and a sin. So she's having a spiritual battle on leave her friend or save her friend from the sin. She had me in the first half, then all that racism came out, and I couldn't believe it for a moment. Then I remembered, oh yeah, I'm in Arkansas. Story 27. I understand people believing in the Bible, but it honestly never dawned on me that people took every story in it for truth instead of stories with morals as to how to lead your life. A coworker of mine mentioned how dinosaurs weren't real because they aren't mentioned in the Bible, and I laughed at his joke. He wasn't joking. Story 28. That there were no gay people as well as women didn't start getting emotional before the television was invented, and it started showing all that stuff. Also, that women don't get menopause. That's literally how he pronounced it. Story 29. One day, my boss asked me if I'd be willing to do some testing for a new software our company had purchased. I already knew the program, so I said that was fine. He said I should expect to receive a meeting invite in the next day or so. The next morning, I have a meeting invite and I accept. I didn't recognize anyone else who was invited, but assumed that they were from the vendor, which is normal. Time comes for the meeting, and it's a dial-in sort of deal, which again is normal for this kind of thing. I dial in on time, and everyone is saying their hellos, and someone asks if I'm on the call. So I say, yep, I'm here, and things get started. The call starts with discussing some coding issues, which is fine, but has nothing to do with me. So I figure they'll get to the testing stuff in a bit. That is, until someone says, quote, "Oh, resting_fartface should look into that." At this point, it dawns on me. This is not my meeting. So I said, "Sorry guys, but I think you've got the wrong person." And there was a stunned silence. "Who are you then?" they ask. I give my first and last name, title, and location. Then someone starts laughing. This was the person who sent me the meeting invite. They were trying to invite two other people to the meeting, one with the same first name as me and one with the same last name. Instead, he invited me, and apparently I sound just like one of those people, so no one suspected anything until I spoke up. Story 30. I got invited to a meeting a few months ago, and while it was semi-related to what I did, I had no idea what the F we were talking about. A woman piped up and said, quote, "Tara and I have been working on this, right, Tara?" I figured she was way behind in her work and never had a chance to contact me about the project, and I didn't want to blow up her spot on a big conference call, so I went along with it. "Yes, we're making good progress, interesting findings, etc. 5 minutes before the meeting ends, I realize there's a woman with my same name in a whole different group that would make a lot more sense to be working on, but I was in too deep, so I just went with it. I explained the mix-up to the other woman as soon as the call ended, and she was very grateful that I was willing to cover for her on a phone call to her bosses, even though she and the other Tara really had made good progress. Story 31. Yesterday, my mother called me to tell me that she thinks I have coronavirus. I have seasonal allergies and no symptoms related to the virus, by the way. She then proceeded to tell me that scientists discovered the virus cannot live over 133 degrees Fahrenheit. At first, I got excited that a breakthrough had been made and thought maybe I missed the news announcement. Then she said, yeah, so they're saying if you plug in a hairdryer and keep breathing in the hot air, it'll kill the virus and you'll be fine. I immediately started cracking up because I thought she had made a joke. Then she got very offended and said it was a real scientific video she saw on Facebook. Facepalm. Story 32. I had an ex-girlfriend try to claim that we were common law married so she could sue for alimony in my house, despite not being together for a year, not living in the same home for any length of time, not sharing our financial situations with one another in the slightest, no shared bills, no joint account, etc. The basis for this was that I found it funny when friends joked that we were like an old married couple, and I didn't immediately clarify the situation to them, so that meant I'd accepted my role as her husband. Took a few court dates, and she walked away disappointed, while I walked away with my legal fees and a little extra. I could have gone after her harder, but just what my lawyer got probably wiped out most of her savings and maxed out her line of credit, so I'd have been paying my lawyer to try and wring blood out of a stone. Story 33. The gal we rented our apartment from very seriously said, quote, "There's one thing I need to warn you about. We're ready for anything after this somber statement. The last people who lived here say the apartment is haunted." We laughed and said, yeah, you got us. You sounded so serious at first. She stared at us blankly. She totally meant it. Story 34. Friend was an anti-vaxxer. Realized it literally 2 days ago when she was posting on Facebook about how if vaccines were safe, they wouldn't have to pay people to test them. This was about the potential of a COVID-19 vaccine. I'm curious how this 4.0 used to love every science class, high IQ, really good at doing research for high school and college, incredibly bright individual sprinted down the conspiracy path. Story 35. Patron, I have a complaint. Yes? There aren't enough books here. I look around at the library that we were standing in. Yeah, it's weird. Sometimes people just take our books home with them. And then the patron says, "You used to have more books." And I go, oh. Story 36. New relationship with a super nice lady. Romantic weekend getaway. She suggests an afternoon float down a nearby river in a canoe. I know from experience canoeing is a serious test of relationship potential. My ex-wife and I couldn't even carry a canoe from the beach to the bay without getting into an argument. Anyhow, new relationship, super nice lady. I'm determined to be a great team player and competent man. I have plenty of experience on the water. This should be a cinch. Canoe livery guy drives us to the drop-off. While he's taking the canoe off the trailer and telling us how long the float is and where the pickup point is, I'm looking at the river. The wide, slow-moving river. The extremely slow-moving river. Along with the fact that it's a blustery, windy day, I can't for the life of me tell which way the river flows. Some leaves are floating left, some leaves are floating right. I toss in a stick and it just floats around in a circle. I'm starting to sweat. I figure I have a 50-50 chance of guessing correctly, but if I guess wrong, it could be a disaster. Having to ask is a total embarrassment. I'm hoping the livery guy makes some reference to direction, but no. I'm desperately hoping to see someone else float by, but no. I picture us paddling upstream for 2 hours of being lost in the river. Livery guy hands us our paddles and says, quote, "So if there's nothing else, I'll see you in a couple hours. Have fun." I bite the bullet and decide that asking is the best way forward. Yeah, which way is downstream? Livery guy and super nice lady both laugh thinking I'm joking. No, I'm serious. Livery guy stops laughing and just points. I'm sure he was thinking that was the most stupid thing he had ever heard. We paddle downriver a bit, and super nice lady says, "Boy, I'm glad you asked. I thought downstream was the other way." So something that I've learned, if you're in a group setting and someone's answering questions and you think that you're about to ask a stupid question, there is a very high probability that someone else in the class has the exact same question, but like you, they think that it would be too stupid of them to ask. So just go ahead and ask the question. There's no such thing as stupid question. Story 37. For my 14th birthday, I asked my mom what she got for me. She told me she bought me a vest. I laughed right at her face and went on a rant about how I hate vests. I thought she knew that beforehand. Fast forward to my birthday, and I received a brand new vest from her. I felt so bad. Story 38. The second time in my life I went out on a date with a guy who brought up 9/11 wasn't real. The first time it happened was in 2012, and it was surreal. Then it happened again a few months ago, and all I could think is, oh no, not again. Well, at least I found out quicker this time. Story 39. I used to ask my then girlfriend to marry me for the lulz because she always told me she would never get married and she always answered no. Then, after 7 years together and a kid, I asked her to marry me for real and she went, no. Wait, you're serious? She said yes, by the way. Still together, 15 plus years total. Story 40. 50-year-old coworker thought that stars were in the sky, as in they're in this planet, and thought shooting stars were them falling. Then I told them that those stars were millions of light years away, and some were a million times bigger than our sun, and he just couldn't comprehend what I was saying. Never convinced him that otherwise. Effin' Victor. Story 41. Not mine, but an ex-employee. He had been assaulted by the boss, and they wanted to pay him off and let him go. I sat in on the firing, and he had a smile the entire time he was being told he was fired, and then I saw the aha moment in his eyes, and he said, "Wait, you're effing firing me after I get assaulted?" The disbelief and outrage were full bloom. Leave it to say he did not go quietly, which he shouldn't have. Others before him had. In the end, he prevailed. Edit. The boss was in entertainment. Old Hollywood, where this kind of thing is a daily occurrence in many lives. Hashtag #MeToo doesn't address a lot of male abuse that goes on there, and it can be severe. Story 42. While mountain biking with my friends, being ahead, trying to do some smart-ass thing, slipping and falling down, when my friends meet up. Me, stupidly grinning. Guys, I think I broke my arm. My friends. Ha, yeah, right, bro. Me, lifting my left arm and showing that it's bending in 3 places now. My friends. Me. So, who wants to drive me to the hospital? But honestly, friends were quite helpful in the end. One of them bicycled back to his home and brought his car. I was in the middle of a forest, so remainder of my friends walked me 1.5 kilometers till where the car could come, loaded me and my mountain bike on it, and off I went to the hospital to get my arm fixed. It's become our go-to topic now, whenever we meet. We still laugh remembering about it. Story 43. A previous coworker of mine went on a 5-ish minute tirade about how much he hated me. To my face, while at work, in front of 10 other people, including our boss. Up until that point, I had never met someone who had disliked me so strongly. At least no one who said anything about it. So I thought he was joking for the first minute or so. I stood there with this ridiculous grin on my face until he paused for breath and one of my other coworkers asked if he was serious. He said, "F yeah, I'm being serious," and started accusing me of being racist, disrespectful, and of favoritism. None of which were true. That quickly wiped the grin off my face, and I stood there dumbfounded until my boss came over and told him to stop talking and to walk away. Everyone stood around, kind of shell-shocked for a bit before we laughed it off. No one knew where it had come from, and he spent the rest of his time there trying to convince everyone else that I was evil, but they all ignored him. I'm extremely grateful for that. He could have made that job a complete hellhole. Story 44. A coworker at a restaurant this week told me his hands were hurting from all the extra hand washing, and I told him we keep moisturizer in the break room. He asked me why we would need moisturizer if he's been soaking his hands in water so many times in a day. I explained to a 29-year-old man with a house, a car, and a child how soap works. Oh, I can think of plenty of people that probably need this exact same reminder daily. Wash your hands, folks. Story 45. I went to a Southern Baptist church a few times. The preacher mentioned the earth being 6,000 to 8,000 years old, or whatever absurd number it was. I had to internalize my giggle. After I left, I mentioned it to a friend and was about to make a smart-ass comment when she interrupted me to tell me how glad she was that the preacher doesn't mind speaking the truth. I started laughing, thinking she was joking. She's well-educated, evidently not a fan of science. She proceeded to tell me that things like carbon dating hasn't been proven. But the Bible? Solid proof. Story 46. Through high school, I had a friend who was rather secretive about his crushes. There was one crush in particular that he refused to name, so I spent weeks guessing and pestering him. But I wore him down, and he agreed to tell me. So I said, "Finally, who is this girl?" And he said, "It's not a girl." I thought he was joking, so I laughed and said, "No, really, who is it?" And he just stared at me. Super embarrassing for me, but he and his boyfriend are very happy now. Story 47. I met a girl at a former job, and we took a fancy to each other quickly. I only ever knew her by her nickname at this point, but we hung out for breakfast and I asked her name. She replied Bubbles, and I began laughing at her face, thinking it's a joke. But no, her parents legitimately named this girl Bubbles, and I just had a deep, hearty laugh at how frickin' stupid it was, in her face. Look, parents, it's your kid. You can name your child whatever you want, but why would you subject them to this? Why would you give your child the same name that you could easily give like a pet or a dog? Bubbles is not an appropriate name for a child. Sorry that you got to go through that, Bubbles. Story 48. At work, it's pretty common for people, especially dads in their 40s to 60s, to jokingly ask for a discount. So I'm used to being like, no, sorry. Wish I could though. One day, a guy who looked like a middle-aged dad asked for a discount, so I laughed and said no, and he followed up with, why not? Dead serious. Ya boy was trying to negotiate a discount, for no reason, not even military or AARP, just wanted me to give him half of his rate for asking, I guess? Story 49. I used to house sit for some neighbors of mine when they would go on trips to Europe without the kids, who were in college. Their house was awesome with the theater, pool table, and plenty of extra bedrooms, so usually I'd just stay over there. Occasionally, one of the kids would swing by the house. The daughter came by one day with her BF, and they went to her room. Suddenly, I hear yelling from upstairs, Greg, come here right now! I was a little worried as to what I would walk into finding, but no, it wasn't that. She's sitting at her laptop pointing at a chat box she had to open to one of her professors. She quickly exclaims, quote, I just told my fitness walking professor I walk for 60 minutes at 3 miles per hour. How far did I walk? I was laughing so hard until I looked over at the BF and he had a straight deadpan face. And my first thought was, oh God, you're serious. When I told her she had walked 3 miles, she exclaimed, that can't be right. That doesn't make any sense. How far would I have gone had I walked for 45 minutes then? Well, I guess that would be 2.25 miles then. I had to explain 60 minutes equals 1 hour and basic multiplication to this girl. 2 other fun stories from this girl. At California Pizza Kitchen, when the waiter asks if we'd like to hear the soup or salads of the day, and she quickly asks, what's a super salad? Another time, house sitting. It's 10 p.m. and suddenly, whoosh, a bunch of bright halogen lights kick in the front yard. I immediately think it's the cops, but when I open the front door, it's the daughter doing some late-night gardening. It was apparently supposed to be her birthday present to her mother, and she had to do it during the week after class. I tell her not to cut the electric dog fence line and put her dad's lights back when she's done. Next morning, I let the dogs out, and they go running down the street. I ask her if she knew she cut the line, to which I get a sharp, I didn't cut the line, I just found where it ended. I can't wait for this idiot to come fix it, so after work I dig up the 2 ends, splice them back together, and as I'm putting the electrical tape on, she pulls up with that BF of hers. She went on with the whole spiel of how she was going to fix it and ends up with, well, what can I do to help? I told her she could test the line to make sure it works. She asks how to do that, so in frustration I tell her, put the collar on. I thought she'd noticed the sarcasm, but no. She walks into the house, grabs one, straps one prongs in on the palm of her hand, and walks up to the line. This particular model beeps when it gets close, so you don't even need to get to the shock, but no. She walks up the line and says, Greg, I don't think it's working, with an immediate beep, beep, and then it shocks her. I stare in disbelief as she just stands there shaking, arm up and down, as I keep hearing beep, 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 until it finally flies off her hand. And somehow she graduated. Shake my head. Story 50. I used to work at a funeral home that did a yearly Christmas celebration. It was super nice. We'd invite all the families we had served that year for a mass and coffee after, and they'd get a lovely metal snowflake with their deceased loved one's name on it. The whole point was about not spending the first Christmas after a loss alone. So it was run by staff volunteering their time, and I figured, hey, let's help this year. There was probably about 250 people there, and boy, did they make a mess of the reception hall. Hundreds of plates and cups to be washed, coffee spills, cake crumbs, food everywhere, not to mention the bathrooms, chapel, hallways, lobby, and entrance needed to be cleaned. No biggie, I'm part-time surplus staff for receptions anyway, so this crap I've dealt with before. Plus, there's like 30 of us. Once the reception was over and everyone went home, my manager congratulated all of us and said since we did such a good job, the salaried employees could go home and the part-time staff could clean everything up. I was the only part-time staff member. Of course, I laughed and pointed out that I was the only part-time staff there. My manager proceeded to laugh and then said, "Oh, I'm sure you don't mind." All right, everyone, let's go, and I'll see you all when the holidays end. Only one salary employee stayed behind to help me clean, my mother's former coworker who took pity on me, and it took us about 6 hours to clean everything. I never volunteered to help with the Christmas gathering again. Story 51. Well, okay, my knees are double jointed, as are my arms and thumbs, so I went over to sit by one of my friends, and I sat on my leg, in a way that apparently made it look like it was broken. So she asked me if I was okay. I still didn't get why she was so freaked out, so I just started eating a pack of fruit snacks. Then she asked me if my leg was okay, and I said yeah. She started staring at it and was saying that it was making her nauseous because it looked like my leg was broken. So then I stood up and showed her my leg's full range of motion, which at the time I thought it was normal to have your knee appear to be backwards, and she passed out. It wasn't a great time. Side note, I showed her the thumb thing later, and she was not a fan of that either. Look, I know it's harmless, but I was also one of those squeamish people, like whenever there was like someone that was double jointed or had something that was dislocated, like, hey, look at what I can do, and just like contorting their body in ways that they really shouldn't be going. So I totally get this. Story 52. Leaders these days don't even have any vision. Not like Stalin. Now, there was a leader. He gave his entire life, devoted so much to his country. It's just about getting the right person in power. Quote from weird Russian janitor at my work. He also told me that Canada's national agenda is to make everyone gay. Both statements were hilarious until I realized he was entirely serious. Story 53. My deluded artist ex-girlfriend had known this yoga guy who was always on acid. My first time meeting him at a party where he took a huge scab off his knee and ate it like it was a potato chip. I was not prepared for that, and it got me so off guard that I did that sick sound when you smell something pretty gnarly. He was then trying to explain how the universe speaks through the body in like yoga, and how he was achieving happiness through a pure life. It was generic hippie buzzwords that pretty much echoed what overly religious people try to say to convert followers. I thought it was kind of stupid, but I was trying to be polite and have a somewhat normal conversation, even if this dude was trying to convince me that I had a distorted view of my own happiness and how this ideology was correct. I never got how to take this guy seriously, but somehow my girlfriend always said that he was woke and that I just didn't get him. I got this dude, there just wasn't much substance to get. I had to hang out with this guy a bunch of times at yoga that my girlfriend would bring me to. Not good vegan potlucks, paid meditations, and some hippie camp retreat. Then we hung out with these other hippies and some art collective who were like Jesuits parading around as artists. I had to hang out with people with no real jobs, had these weird artificial personas, did a lot of psychedelic drugs, listened to really bad psytrance music about God, and they were actually pretty condescending and gossipy. At the hippie camp retreat, we all ran around in a field in a circle and paired up with another partner to tell them what makes us happy, then run in the field and pair up with someone else and tell them what made us sad, our regrets, favorite moments, etc. It was probably the dumbest crap I've ever been a part of, but for my girlfriend, it was some enlightening experience. I like to think I'm open-minded about things, and I really tried to wrap my head around these people, but there wasn't much to get. Every sort of genuine reaction from these people would have some deflective quality to it, and trying to talk to them on a personal level was somehow off. They were talking about the government was the enemy of them, that through a pure life one will find happiness, and that they were going to live off the grid on a farm. So at one point I was done with it and decided going to their events because it was all a waste of my time and I was constantly bored. My girlfriend thought I was jealous of her friends and their wokeness, but honestly I didn't care. She could go to those events. Then she started cheating on me with some older moron and I dumped her. Haven't been to one of those hippie events since, and I'm pretty sure haven't missed much. I always thought in pop culture that hippies were pot-smoking, far-out people who listen to Hendrix, but then you meet some really culty-sounding hippies that take themselves way too seriously. Then you're like, really? Look, the story is what it is, but I will not stand for any Jimi Hendrix slander. I won't. That's the GOAT. Show him some respect. Story 54. When I used to work at PDX, I had a woman point to a effing ambulance with its lights on and say, quote, "Why do they have to park here? They're taking up so much room." I said, "You do realize that's an ambulance and that ambulances come here when someone is sick or injured." She said she understood, but it wasn't convenient. I told her I'd go in there and tell the guy having a heart attack he should have waited for a better time. Story 55. Met this conspiracy theorist at a coffee shop. He tells me that all the technological advances since World War II are from aliens. President Truman signed a treaty with them. The aliens dole out microwaves, computers, etc., and in return they can abduct a few people for tests. When that Malaysian flight disappeared, the aliens needed a bunch of people. Story 56. Told my teachers I was autistic. They instantly shifted their demeanor and started patronizing me and talking to me like I was some kind of subhuman trash. My initial thoughts were that it was just a dumb joke and poor taste, but you know. Story 57. I was playing Minecraft servers with some pen pals when he told me his best friend had died. I said, "LOL, he deserved it," thinking he was talking about in the game. He said, "No, I mean, he just unalived himself." I said, "Okay then, I'm sorry for laughing," and just left. Story 58. I play a lot of disc golf, and this guy I played with regularly, but is a little off, meets me at a local community college course one day and starts telling me about the last time he played there, and how he threw a shot over the pond and some kids approached it, picked it up, and walked off with it. He tells me he yelled at them and told them, "You'll be sorry next time." So as he's loading up his disc bag, he takes a pistol out of his glove compartment and tucks it in his pants, just in case they're there again. On a college campus. Yeah, I don't play with him anymore. Story 59. Not really mine, but I was the one that was serious. One of my friends came out to me as transgender, and with her permission, I told it to our mutual friends. One of them was being an idiot and kept calling her him and her old name. Eventually, I just said, "Mate, stop being an idiot, otherwise she's probably gonna kick you out of the server, and I don't want that for you." He then realized we were serious and explained that he thought it was a joke because we had done jokes on him multiple times, and I gotta admit, we would think of such a thing as a joke. Luckily, everything worked out and he apologized to her. Story 60. Have a friend who has some serious mental issues, schizophrenia, I think, and he used to believe he had these powers to control people with his mind and that he can see into the future. Well, about 2 years ago, I stopped hanging out with him and he ended up going to a mental hospital on and off about 6 different times. I recently started going to a tech school and saw him there. We caught up and he seemed to be on meds and a lot more normal again. Well, I went to chill with him last week and he brought up his powers and thought he was just effing with me, so I said, "Oh, hi, yeah, real funny, Frankie." And he's like, "Nah, I'm dead serious, dude." And then he mentioned something about how he just started taking his meds again. Yikes. Story 61. I have trouble with the concept of underwater telecommunications cables. It's a running joke now with my husband because, for some reason, I can't wrap my head around their existence, despite the obvious fact that that's how transoceanic communications have to work without satellites and the numerous pictures, videos, and other clear evidence of their existence. I was in my early 20s, watching some TV or movie with my husband, and I idly commented on how it was done. Did they lay a giant cable across the Atlantic? And I was in disbelief when my husband told me that of course that was how it's done. I spent a stupid amount of time trying to believe in this. What if a shark bites through it? How did they even know it would work? That's a lot of cable. My husband couldn't believe how naive I was on this issue, but it really was a case of I never thought about it before. Holy crap, that's overwhelming. So while I totally accept that the oceans are full of underwater cables, I still giggle at the idea, 15 plus years later. One day, I want to go to a place where they come up out of the water. I need to see these things myself. Story 62. I'm a first aid instructor in Germany, and I was at a retirement home teaching the staff. A woman told me that she read on Facebook that the only thing you need to do when someone has a stroke is to stick a needle into the patient's finger because there will be something like pressure equalization in the brain. I started laughing because I thought it was a joke. She was 100% serious, and I had to explain to her that it's not true. That it's really important to call an ambulance because a stroke is really dangerous, and that Facebook isn't the best source for medical questions. Story 63. It was my first Tinder date. We were figuring out what to order, and he asked me if I was some ridiculously specific type of vegan. Like free range, all organic, only local veganism. I thought he was making a joke, so I laughed a good deep belly laugh for at least a minute, but stopped and said, "Oh," when I realized he was serious, and that was what he actually was. We got a fancy small pizza that he proceeded to rip apart pieces of but didn't even eat. Guess it wasn't okay for his diet. Story 64. Not me. My uncle ran summer programs for youth to get jobs, work, etc., and was someone who was straightforward and loved joking with the teenagers. He's introduced to a teenage girl and speaks general questions. She doesn't respond, so then he jokes, "What are you, deaf or hard of hearing or something? Talk!" To which my cousin tells him, yes, she's deaf. The young lady herself found it hilarious and signed to him that it was a relief that he didn't do the standard raise his voice and yell, because that's what most people do to the deaf community, and treated her like he treats everyone else. Story 65. This morning, a friend from high school hit me up. She needed my advice. She's 19 and pregnant in a very conservative country. Think West Africa. Given that we've talked about extensive contraceptive use in the past, I said, quote, "Nice joke, try something else." She proceeded to send me her test results and her appointment with the gynecologist. She's planning on getting an abortion in our country where it's illegal. I'm still trying to figure out what to tell her. She doesn't want to involve her parents because the father of the child is already married. She also doesn't want to keep the baby. However, the death toll from shady abortions in our home country is really high. I'm lost. And it all started with, "Hi, X," insert laugh emoji, "I'm pregnant." Story 66. My coworker recently went vegan. She was telling me that she was trying to find a vegan egg substitute before she realized that eggs were vegan. She previously thought eggs were dairy, but then it just occurred to her that they were actually vegan. The concerning thing is she's a nurse. Story 67. Got to my new place of employment and was meeting the team that was going to train me. One of the trainers says, "I hope this goes better than my last trainee named Joe." Did he not make it? I asked. No, he unalived himself. I just sat there waiting for a punchline or something, chuckling nervously. The supervisor said, "Oh yeah, was he the one who shot himself or the one who ran his car into a pylon?" Needless to say, I survived training. Story 68. UK checking in. I went to a doctor in Las Vegas, had a sunstroke. Treated with a bag of saline. I was in there for about an hour. Receptionist gave me the bill, just over $1,000. Being used to the NHS, never having seen a medical bill before, I burst out laughing. This can't be right. Oh, it is? Damn. Story 69. A former boss told me that when he was in the army, he and his buddies used to catch wildlife and kill or torture it. Mostly animals that wandered too close to the firing range, but with cats, he would capture them and light them on fire because it's effing hilarious. And then he'd do a pantomime of the cats running in circles, flopping around, until they got slower and finally did the last flop. All the whole making cartoon cat noises and laughing. He loved telling animal lovers this because he thought people who actually liked cats were morons. Effed up, man. Story 70. I grew up in Asia, and when I was 12, I had an English tutor. My weekly homework was to translate a one-page text my tutor wrote up from English to Chinese. I did this by flipping through a Chinese to English dictionary. I was a very diligent student. That's why I became very distressed one week when there is an English word that kept on appearing in the text that I couldn't find in the dictionary. I came back the next week in shame and told my tutor I had failed my homework. He said, "Connie, this is your name." Story 71. This was about 2 months ago, and me and a coworker work in a grocery store. I, male, 16, see an old male with a swastika tattoo on his ankle, and I was like godsmacked since I live in Australia and never seen it before. I go back to tell my coworker, male, 22, this, and he's like, "A SWAT sticker?" I'm like, "No, a swastika." And this goes on and on for a few minutes. When I ask if he knows who Hitler is, and he says yes, then my manager comes in and finally has to tell him what a swastika is. Also, more information in Australia, we learn about the Second World War for 3 to 4 years throughout school, which blew my mind he didn't know this. Story 72. So this happened on my shift this morning. Well, technically last night around 2 a.m. I'm on the graveyard shift. Had a woman come in. She seemed a little frazzled and is carrying a Bible, but otherwise she seems fine. She buys some chips and starts talking to me about crazy, this coronavirus stuff. Yada yada. Then she tells me ate an evil spirit pretending to be a clove of garlic. I, of course, think she's just messing with me, but no. She pulls out a piece of garlic, lays it on the counter, and starts telling me it isn't garlic and is in fact a demon that wanted to possess her. She then starts asking me about if I believe in spirits or if I can see it, because despite looking like I'm one of the humans that's a third demon, I'm really a human who's a third angel who was sent to Earth to help her expel the evil spirits, and urges she feels that's okay if I didn't know it because she can see it, and she leaves the garlic on the counter and tells me she'll wait for me to deal with it. Okay, so I just read this and I still have absolutely no idea what this lady's talking about. Oh my goodness, that's a doozy. Story 73. I'm a grade 3 teacher. One of the students I got this year had a reputation for causing a tantrum when things didn't go his way. However, I had built a degree of rapport with him early on, so he hadn't shown much of that behavior throughout the year at this point. We played bingo one day, and I promised the winner a small incentive the following day, to which he won. I had to call in sick and schedule supply the next day. The supply called me at the end of the day and told me one of my students flew into a rage, trashed the classroom and the trophy cases in the hallway, and broke his glasses by throwing a chair at his face. The supply I called was a friend back in teachers college, so I thought he was joking. He was not. Last time I played bingo without a prize immediately ready. A definite learning experience. Story 74. Not me, but I had a friend that sits next to a classmate for 1.5 years now. Friend. Nice ring. Is that fake? Classmate. No, it's real. I got engaged. Friend. Ah, yeah, okay. Classmate 2. No, she got engaged. I was there when it happened. Classmate had only been dating this dude for 6 months. Story 75. I was on the receiving end of one just yesterday. My state just issued a shelter-in-place order during the workday, so our HR manager comes by everyone's office to let us know that we're an essential business and won't be closing. So I asked, will we be getting hazard pay? She kind of chuckled at me, but then she saw the look on my face, stumbled over some half-answer, and backed out of my office. Story 76. I was traveling in America some years ago. A girl in a shop asked where I was from, and I said Denmark. She looked confused, so I said, it's in Europe. She then asked me if I could say something in European to her, so after a second, I started just saying random words in different languages. It seemed to satisfy her. Story 77. We had dinner with family while my siblings and my cousins were teenagers. While on the way there, my mom said, there will be a family announcement, and all you have to do is shut your mouth and listen to it. I'm thinking my single aunt found somebody, or my cousin is coming out. Whatever, I'm ready. So about halfway through dinner, my aunt cues my cousin to speak. She's kind of quiet. Tension is thicker than the poorly cooked steak in front of us, and she starts with a shaky, well, to which my dad cuts in. What, it's not like you're pregnant? Absolute silence, and my dad is looking around with a dumb smirk, waiting for someone to laugh at his joke. My siblings and I are half smirking in our own nerves as the anxiety chokes us like a poorly cooked steak, and then the tears started. All he had to do was shut the F up, and the steak was really poorly cooked.